Okay, so the past 2 days you've been going over the unit circle. And remember, we defined the unit circle as a circle on an xy coordinate centered at the origin with a radius of 1. So you can see here, if I went to the left, I'd be at -1, to the right at +1. Now, anywhere on this circle, if I drew a ray, it creates an angle with the x-axis, and then I can find the coordinate of this point where the ray intersects the circle. And remember, in order to do so, we said that the x-coordinate was cosine of the theta, and the y-coordinate was sine of theta, which is just the angle measurement here. And we focused the last 2 days on the first quadrant. Today we're going to be extending those points to all of the other 3 quadrants. So I'm going to actually show you what a completed unit circle looks like if you have not seen one already. So here's what the unit circle looks like in its entirety. So I'm going to actually pull up a highlighter. Now we have really 3 families of angles and then our quadrantal angles. So usually when we talk about the families, we do typically refer to them in radians. So for example, I'll usually say the pi/6 family, pi/4 family, and pi/3 family. Because if you look at all of my radians especially, so I have pi/6, pi/4, pi/3, 2 pi/3, 3 pi/4, 5 pi/6, 7 pi/6, 5 pi/4, 4 pi/3. So my denominators are almost always 6, 4, 3, 2, or 1. So I'm going to start by highlighting the pi/6 family. So here's 1 pi/6, 5 pi/6, 7 pi/6, and then lastly 11 pi/6. So we call this the pi/6 family because the denominator in each case is 6. Now, if you notice the coordinates here, they are all essentially the same except for the sign. Because if I drew a triangle in each of these quadrants, my x and y distance stay the same. So for example, I'm going the same amount to the right or to the left to get to that point. I'm going the same amount up or down in each of those cases. Okay, so that's why we refer to that as the pi/6 family. So the coordinate for my pi/6 family is √3/2, comma 1/2. Now if I'm in the second quadrant over here, because I'd be going left first, it's negative √3/2, comma positive 1/2, because I go to the left and then up. Whereas if I'm in the third quadrant, anytime I graph a coordinate point in the third quadrant, both the x and the y coordinates are negative. So that's why you'll see negative √3/2, negative 1/2. Now I'm going to erase this, and now I'm going to highlight the pi/4 family. So I'll choose a different color here. So now I'm just going to highlight the pi/4 family. So I have pi/4, 3 pi/4, 5 pi/4, and 7 pi/4. And again, with our pi/4 family, you'll see that these coordinates are all the same except for the sign. So in the fourth quadrant, I know we didn't talk about that one last time, my x coordinate is positive because I'm going right first, and then I go down. So my y coordinate is negative. Now, I think I mentioned in one of the previous videos, in these unique circumstances, you are not going to have to memorize the unit circle. Obviously, I can't force you to memorize it. However, I want you to know if you're taking trig pre-calc next year, this is a large part of trig pre-calc. In fact, you'll spend almost all of Q3 right after winter break on trigonometry. And in that case, you really will need to have this memorized. So I want you to kind of, while you can have your unit circle out at all times, I encourage you to really make your own so that you have it on paper. And can reference that as you go. And then our last family is the pi/3 family. So again, I'm going to choose a different color here. Let's go with purple. We'll see how dark it turns out. So I have pi/3, 2 pi/3, 4 pi over 3, and then lastly 5 pi over 3. And obviously each of those do correspond with their degree measurements as well. It's just because the denominators are all the same, it kind of makes it easier to talk about them as the pi over 3 family. So in this case, my coordinate is 1/2 comma root 3 over 2 in each of the 4 cases with just the signs changing. So let's recap here and let's really figure out about our signs. So we focused a lot about the signs changing. Well, in quadrant 1, so the top right over here, because we are going to the right and then up, your x is always going to be positive, your y is always going to be positive. In quadrant 2, you would go to the left and then up. So that means your x coordinate is always going to be negative, your y coordinate is always going to be positive. In quadrant 3, the bottom left, we go left and down. So my x coordinate is always negative, and my y coordinate is always negative. And then finally in quadrant 4, so I go right and then down, so that means my x coordinate is positive, my y coordinate is negative. And think about it just like you were to graph any other coordinate point, it would be the same thing for these coordinate points. So today you're going to be answering some more questions on the unit circle. This time we're extending it to all of the other 3 quadrants. And then tomorrow we'll add on just a little bit more.